today's video, I'm going to create a fall themed interactive card using the Knock Knock Who's There and the Knock Knock Who's There tree add-on. The first thing I like to do when I am working with a brand new interactive card is lay out my design. So this was just kind of a general idea of what I wanted to do for my Knock Knock Who's There and what animal I wanted to have kind of peeking out at that door. Now, in full disclosure, this is actually kind of a cartoon inspired from my childhood cartoons that I used to watch. And the stamp sets that I used are Den Sweet Den, Snow Much Fun, and I'm also going to be using the favorite flannel fall paper pack. I wanted to have one of the bears wear a scarf, but I wanted it to be on pattern paper. And this is the perfect paper pack to do that. So I picked one out, and you really don't need a lot. It's going to be a really tiny scarf, and you're going to catch just a little bit of the pattern there. So I stamped everything in 80-pound or on 80-pound white cardstock, and I stamped it in the jet black ink from Lawn Fawn. Now I'm going to use my Copic markers to color in all my images. Now for all of the bears, I did E57, E55, E53, and E51. As I was coloring my first bear here, I realized all of these markers heavily needed to be re-inked and even some of my tips needed to be changed out. So after I had finished coloring this bear, I did kind of stop filming. I changed tips on some of my markers and I refilled them. So it was a lot easier to color and to blend once I did that. I'll show all the coloring for the bears, but I do speed it up, but I'm using the same approach to each one. So my mama bear here is facing to the left, so I put my darkest color on the right, and that was the E57. Then I just slowly blended out. Now I also added shadow areas under the arms and on the bottom of the legs. So I did that to kind of give that some dimension to my bear. Now on Papa Bear, this is the one that's going to be standing. I really wanted him to look like he had a nice round belly. So I did add shadow on each side of his belly and then also underneath to kind of round that out. I also added that E57 to the side of the head and then to the inside of each of the legs. And once again, just blending out with those remaining colors. So the E55, 53, and 51. When the image kind of looks like it's a straight on shot and it's not like facing in any direction, I tend to put my darker areas on the outside. I don't know if that's like the correct way to color it, but to me that worked out. And I think with Papa Bear, it did end up looking like he had a nice round belly. Now, Papa Bear is meant to or can be interactive, so that's why the arms are separate. And I did color those in the same colors, adding the darkest shadow part to the bottom of his arms. And then I moved on to the smaller bears. I wasn't sure if I was going to use all of these small bears, but they were so cute. I just had to color them in. And I figured if nothing else, I would at least save it for a future project. Now, once again, I kind of looked at the direction that the bear was facing. The one on the right, it is looking up. It's actually going to be looking up at Mama Bear. So I made sure that the lightest area was on the right-hand side. Then for this one that I'm coloring in, it's just like Papa Bear, it's facing to the front. So I kept all the shadow areas on the outside edge. Then this last little guy, this one is actually going to be the one that's going to be popping out of the door, the interactive piece. And I did this one where I did the darkest color at the very bottom of the bear and then on the right side of the head and also just kind of around the outside of his body. And again, just blended that out with the rest of the colors. For the muzzle, I did an E50. I think I might have done that off camera. But here I am taking my E57 and I'm adding these little dots to some of the darker areas of the bears. And I'll also do that with an E55. All that's really doing is adding a little bit or making it look like texture. So it's giving the bears just a little bit more. I have these a fun stack of books. So I did the pages of the books with a Y23. One of the books I colored with YR21, BG32, G94, and R85. I didn't do any shading to those because those are not really the focus of my project. And then I used some of those same colors for the knitting that my mama bear is going to be doing. Then I lined up the coordinating die for each of those images, held them down with Post-it tape, and ran that through the die cut machine. Now, with Mama Bear, she does have this extra die piece, so I line that up over her hands. And when I die cut that, it's going to allow her to actually be holding something. For the scarf, I trimmed that small piece out and then I'm going to use my scissors to fussy cut. And I'm cutting this right to the edge of the black line. So it's not going to have any outline to it. And when you're doing fussy cutting, it is really helpful to actually turn the paper versus turning your scissors. Now I'm going to start kind of building some of my bears. So I added tape runner to the back of the arms for my Papa Bear and placed him over the top. And then I added his cute little scarf. He is seriously the cutest with that colored scarf. Now for Mama Bear, she's going to be having some knitting there. So I added tape runner to the back of that and then tucked that into her hands. Now I'm going to start working on some of the elements to start building my scene. So I am taking the Knock Knock Who's There tree add-on. I die cut the tree from some ground coffee cardstock. And there's also the door that's also going to be part of my card front. For the top of the tree, I'm going to use that same favorite flannel fall paper pack. And I'm going to be die cutting the top of the tree from just one of the green designs in there. And I'm going to be doing a landscape card. So I just kind of laid that out to get an idea how that's going to look and how my tree fluff is going to look there. For the interactive portion, I am taking 80-pound white cardstock, and that is 8.5 by 11, and I'm cutting it at 4 1/4. So because this is a landscape card, I'm going to score that at 5.5. Now, this is not my card base. This is the piece I'm going to need to do the interactive part. So I'm folding that in half. I'm going to reinforce that fold with my bone folder, and then I'm going to bring out the Knock Knock Who's There interactive die. I'm going to open up this folded panel and I'm going to take the rounded door. So this is going to be the door that matches my tree. And I'm going to bring this up close to show you how I'm lining it up. There's two arrows there. One I'm lining up with my actual fold, and the other one is going to point or line up right at the bottom of that base. So I held that down with Post-it tape. I ran that through the die cut machine, and that's going to create my door on the front of this panel. I'll end up decorating this a little bit later on, but this is the base of what you're going to be needing to create that interactive portion. Now, we do also have a track. So I open this up once again, and I'm laying that track down so that that edge is pointing towards my door. You see the arrow there, and then I have that lined up flush with the bottom of that base. Ran that through the die cut machine, and that's going to create our track on the other side of this panel. But once we fold it, you'll see how this all comes together. So here is my T-shaped piece. It has a score line there on the end. So I'm folding that down away from me. This is the front of my interactive card. I'm going to open it up. And what you'll do is you'll take that T and kind of slide it into the track. I'm just showing you this for right now, how it's going to kind of look once it's put together. But I'm going to take this out for right now so that I can decorate behind my door. I'll come back to that piece in just a minute. I removed that T and I kind of masked off my area. So this is going to be the part that you see when you open the door. You're not really going to see the track. There's just a small area you're going to see. And I wanted to kind of create a ground for my bear and then also the background of the tree. So I'm masking that off with Post-it tape. I did the floor in number 2 pencil with a blending brush. And then I'm going to ink blend this top portion with crunchy leaf. So that kind of looks like when you're opening that tree door, you're going to see the inside of the tree. I was really proud of myself that I was kind of planning ahead a little bit. But one thing that I did forget to do was decorate kind of behind the door. That ended up being plain white. But I was really happy that when you open this door, kind of looks like a little home that's behind there. Since I have my ink blending or my blending brushes out and my ink, I'm going to take my tree that I die cut from the ground coffee cardstock and I'm ink blending around the edges with walnut ink from Lawn Fawn. I'm also going to take the tree fluff that I die cut from that favorite flannel fall paper pack. And I started going around the edges first with a freshly cut grass, but that was almost too bright of a green for me. So I am going to then bring in artichoke and I'm just going to go right around those edges. It actually turned out to be a really pretty color combination, kind of going from that texture of the pattern paper in the background to kind of a nice bright green and then this artichoke green. So it really kind of added dimension to my tree fluff. So while making this card, I'm always bringing in my panel and laying things out to make sure that things are kind of going in the right direction that I want it to. I almost forgot that I needed to add some ink blending to my door. So this had also been die cut out when I did the tree base, and I added the walnut ink around that as well. I want to ink blend a sky on the front of this panel, so I put repositionable tape on the back. I opened it up and then I'm placing my Slimline Grassy stencil over the top. So this is the front part where the door is opening. And at first, I started ink blending using the leftover ink that was on my blending brush. And then once that kind of wore off, I brought in the artichoke ink and blended that towards the top of the grass. I'm not worried if this ink gets on the white of the door because that's going to get covered up anyway. Now, once I have the grass done, I'm going to shift that down, line up the top of that stencil so it's masking off my grass. I'm going to hold the stencil down with a low tack tape. And then for this one, I really wanted to have kind of a fall colored background. I started out with apricot and I must have had a lot of leftover ink on there that was a little bit darker of an orange than I thought it was going to be. So I did the apricot there, and then I'm going to come in towards the very top with fake tan. I don't need to go all the way to the left because that's going to end up getting covered up with my tree fluff. Now, at first, this is going to look a little blotchy, but once all of the inks kind of dry back, it turns out to be a nice glowing fall background. So I removed the stencil, I kind of closed things up, and I am going to start putting some of my pieces down. I started with my door. I added liquid glue to the back of the door. I actually had this folded so that my door was sticking out. I thought that would be a little bit easier so I didn't risk getting glue on the rest of my card front. I'm adding tape runner to my tree fluff. I'm going to add that to the top. Now, this I had to be a little careful of. I had to shift it up a little bit because it was hanging quite low and I didn't want it to catch on the door. So I added that and then I'm adding the liquid glue to the back of the actual tree portion. I'm going to line that up around the door. So you want to be careful that you're not putting that too far down where it's going to catch and your door won't open. It fits perfectly around that opening. Then I'll flip that over and just trim off any excess that's hanging off over the top. Now I can bring in my T-shaped piece. So once again, I opened up the card and I just tuck the T in that track. Now we have that folded piece that we did earlier. I unfolded it so it's kind of sticking out and I'm adding a 1/4 inch double-sided tape to that tab. Now, I kind of have this T-shaped piece slid over so that it is kind of right up to the edge of where my crease is. I'm going to remove the backing of that 1/4 inch double-sided tape, and then I can just fold the door over, and that's going to catch it, and it's going to be able to move that track back and forth. So now when I test it, I can open and close. The track moves perfectly for this. And then I'm going to start working on some of the assembly. So I have my books that I'm going to add first, and then I'm going to have my bear kind of tucked off on the side. I'm adding tape runner to these, and just be mindful where you're adding your tape runner. You don't want to add too much where it's going to stick to the background behind. Otherwise, your interactive card won't move. So I added that there. I had the bear just slightly tucked under the tree. So that way, when I open the door, we have that adorable little bear who fell asleep reading books. I added foam tape to the inside of that, and I did that around the track. You don't want to get any too close where the T is going to catch. So that's just going to give this a little dimension so that way your interactive piece moves freely. Now I can start kind of building the rest of my scene with the bears. Off screen, I die cut this scalloped oval. This is also off of the Knock Knock Who's There. I think it's from the tree add-on. And I also have this heart that I die cut from Ballet Slippers. So that's just kind of like that little welcome sign in the front of the door. And then I have a sentiment that I just placed there just to give me an idea what I was going to do for the sentiment. I brought in some clouds from my favorite set, all of the clouds. They're added with tape runner, which I highly recommend because then it is easier to move if you need to, which I typically do. I am adding Mama Bear and the other little bear there with some thin foam squares. Off camera, I did also stamp and quickly color in some leaves, and that is from the Jump for Joy set. I felt like I needed something else in the background to kind of give it that fall vibe. So the leaves I added with the tape runner, And then I have Papa Bear and the other little bear there that I'm adding with the thin foam squares. I had a little bit of that cloud that was hanging off on the right-hand side there, so I will just trim that off, and then I will move on to working on my sentiment. I am using the Scripty Autumn Sentiments set for this. I am stamping the word grateful onto 80-pound white cardstock using black licorice ink. I die cut it out with the coordinating die, and then I also die cut it out about 3 more times from just plain white cardstock. And what I like to do is stack these up. So I add liquid glue to the top of the plain white ones, and then I can just go through and quickly kind of pick it up with the top one, which is the stamped version. And then I can move these so that they all line up together. And this is a really easy way to add dimension to those sentiments without having to worry about trimming foam squares into tiny strips. I'm also going to have a small banner sentiment underneath there. So I die cut the banner from Kraft Cardstock and I'm placing that in my Misty tool, which I have a sticky mat in to hold my banner in place. I lined up this wavy sentiment over the top and again, just stamping that in the black licorice ink. The banner itself, I die cut out about 2 or 3 times from that same craft cardstock and stacked together with my tape runner. But I did also add some thin foam squares behind it. It sounds like a lot of dimension, but it's really not. There's already going to be dimension with our foam tape inside of our card, but it does give it a little bit of a lift to make it pop off from the background. Now I have a top folding card base here. Be really mindful where you put your tape runner on your card base. I didn't realize it at first, but I put tape runner down towards the bottom where the track is. So afterwards, when I was opening and closing the door, it was kind of sticking. It's even sticking here a little bit. So I did have to kind of lift up the bottom of the card and take away some of that tape runner so that way my interactive piece could move freely. I have a couple finishing touches that I want to do, and one of them is adding some highlight areas to my bears using my white gel pen. I also added it to the leaves in the background and then some glittery stickles to my heart. So now this card is finished. We have this top folding landscape card that you can open up and write a personal message in, but all of the fun is on the front so that when you open that door, it reveals the cute little sleeping with bear with his books. Again, I could have kind of ink blended behind the door and I probably could have die cut that T-shaped piece from some craft cardstock. So just some tips that I want to share with you if you are creating one similar to this. I hope you all enjoyed today's video and I hope you have as much fun as I did playing with the new Knock Knock Who's There interactive die. Thanks for watching.